Opening scene, dark, brooding visuals of an Indonesian rainforest shrouded in mist. Faint echoes of chains and screams in the background. Voiceover starts. Human history is a tapestry woven from the threads of triumph and tragedy. But buried deep within its folds are stories so dark, so devastating, that they are seldom spoken of. Today, we uncover a centuries-old tale of greed, betrayal, and unimaginable suffering, the Banjar Massacre, an atrocity carried out during Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear might change the way you view colonial history forever. Transition to a map highlighting Southeast Asia with the island of Borneo being zoomed into. In the mid-19th century, the Sultanate of Banjar, located in southeastern Borneo, found itself at the mercy of Dutch colonialists. The Netherlands, like many European powers of its time, was deep into its quest for imperial dominance, driven by the thirst for resources, power, and a twisted sense of manifest destiny. The Banjar Sultanate was rich in timber, gold, and strategic trade routes. Pause for emphasis. But for the Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, and later the Dutch colonial government, this wasn't just an opportunity to trade, it was a chance to conquer. Scene transition to paintings and engravings of Dutch explorers and ships docking on the Borneo coastline. Overlay text. 1850s. The power structure of Banjar was fragile. The Sultan, Muda Muhammad Seman, ruled over fragmented territories divided between loyalists and opportunist local chieftains who were easily influenced by Dutch officials. Switch to visuals of gold mines and deforestation. The Dutch eagerly exploited these divisions. They dangled promises of wealth and modernization, manipulating local leaders into competing with each other. All the while, the Dutch siphoned riches from the fertile forests and exploited the labor of indigenous workers, pushing them to the brink of starvation. Historical document imagery fades in, a Dutch colonial report citing peacekeeping missions. Their justification for occupying Banjar was, of course, cloaked in a familiar narrative, civilizing the savages. They promised peace and infrastructure but delivered chains and bloodshed. In hindsight, peace was never on their agenda. It was always about extraction and control. Switch to visuals of collapsing local communities, overworked laborers, villages burnt to the ground, women and children crying. Now here's where the story takes a gruesome turn. Any resistance from Banjar locals was met with unspeakable brutality. The Dutch had an expertise in turning human lives into disposable commodities, and this expertise was honed in Banjar. Silent pause. Somber background music grows louder. On April 28, 1859, the Banjar warriors under Prince Antasari mobilized a rebellion. They were no longer able to bear the humiliation, forced labor, or the theft of their homelands. It began as a guerrilla campaign, a series of ambushes targeting Dutch trade routes. At first, the rebellion seemed to take the Dutch by surprise. Switched to black and white sketches of battles in jungles and rivers. Victories fueled hope for Banjar's freedom. They knew the terrain, using it to their advantage against the better-equipped but directionless colonial troops. For a moment, it seemed the tides might turn. Transition to sinister background music. But then the Dutch resorted to their signature strategy: unrestricted violence. Using intelligence gathered from local informants and collaborators, they retaliated with overwhelming force. Entire villages were razed as punishment. Men slaughtered, women assaulted, and children left to starve. What the Dutch called pacification was no more than systematic annihilation. Scene changes to an engraving of Dutch forces marching into Banjar territory, setting everything ablaze. Dates flash on the screen: 1859 to 1863. Perhaps the most infamous event during these years was the Banjar Massacre. Historical records remain sparse, whether by luck or design we cannot say, but the skeletal remains and oral histories passed down by surviving families tell a harrowing narrative of unimaginable bloodshed. Voice goes softer, then sharpens in tone. Dutch troops surrounded a populated village near the port of Banjar Massacre. Men, women, and children were dragged from their homes, accused of being rebels or of aiding the insurgents. Without trial, hundreds were executed on the spot, while others were taken as prisoners to labor camps, never to return. Survivors recount that the rivers ran red. This wasn't a conventional battle. It was terror. Graphic overlay, an engraving of the aftermath, a desolate village, the charred remains of homes, and human bodies strewn like forgotten debris. To extinguish resistance completely, the Dutch introduced a scorched earth policy. They burned forests and poisoned the rivers. To them, no strategy was too inhumane if it meant crushing Prince Antasari and his forces. Visual: portrait of Prince Antasari. Overlay text: Prince Antasari, leader and martyr of the Banjar Rebellion. Yet even as his men dwindled and his allies betrayed him under Dutch bribes, Antasari continued his fight. He became a symbol of unyielding defiance, despite increasing isolation. Tragically, he succumbed not to Dutch bullets, but to smallpox, a grim reminder of how colonization often wielded disease as an unspoken weapon. Switch to an old photo of a Dutch colonial mansion superimposed over images of local destruction. By the mid-1860s, Banjar's resistance had all but collapsed under the burden of Dutch military superiority and internal division. The Dutch solidified their rule, extracting resources more efficiently than ever. But like so many colonial ventures, their victory left scars that would never heal. Background grows darker. Ambient sounds of chain clanking and soft cries fade in. It's impossible to estimate the precise death toll. What we do know is that an entire generation of Banjar people was lost, not just to violence, but to famine, disease, and displacement. Families shattered, lands stolen, a culture pushed to the brink of erasure. Shift to modern-day visuals of bustling Indonesian cities juxtaposed with impoverished villages. This leads us to a sobering question. How many more stories like the Banjar Massacre are buried under the weight of colonial archives? How many atrocities have simply been forgotten, erased to preserve the narrative of the so-called civilized? Music crescendos. And here's where history stops feeling ancient and starts feeling painfully contemporary. Hundreds of years have passed, but the structures of exploitation built during colonial empires persist. Southeast Asia remains a region marked by economic disparity and resource-driven corruption, the legacies of imperial greed. Areas like Borneo still show the environmental scars of colonial extraction, deforestation, pollution, and lost biodiversity. Scene returns to a misty forest resembling the opening shot. So, as we close the chapter on this forgotten tale of the Banjar Massacre, let us ask ourselves, who benefits from the history we choose to forget? And how should we, knowing these truths, act differently today? Closing text on screen. History never forgets, even when humanity does. Outro music fades out. End scene. Screen goes black. Ensure the expanded voiceover is even more entertaining, but that it maintains the same style, tone, and key points as the original.